Greetings.
TJ! Aha! At last the night begins. So, what fascinating topics do you want to dig into with giant spoons tonight?
Why spoons, of all things? Uh,
Well, because when you go after an entire quart of ice cream, it is wise to go after it with the biggest soup spoon in the house.
yeah.
But fortunately, but to do it in moderation so that it's not so big a spoon that it won't fit into your mouth.
Yeah. I have a pretty big mouth, as most of my friends will tell you.
So you can use a soup ladle.
Yeah, I think I could, I might even just be able to get away with just using the ice cream scooper.
Okay, what hot and grubby topics should we pursue tonight?
I don't know. Usually you start off by giving me some sort of context of what you're doing at the moment, so.
Well, okay, tonight has been, the president made a speech today, and it is half of the speech that we've been waiting for him to make for a long time. A nation that looks up goes up, and a nation that looks down goes down. And to look up, you've got to have a vision. You've got to have a picture, for God's sakes, of what in the world it is that you're aiming toward. And you've got to be aiming toward something that'll produce some results 2 years down the road, and 20 years down the road, and even 80 years down the road. You have to have a vision of something that will elevate your grandchildren to a plane no one ever imagined in our lifetime. The way that being able to take a plane to LA and get there in 5 hours has elevated us beyond our great 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 grandparents, who, if they wanted to go to the West Coast, had to get on a wagon train, spend 18 months getting there, and have a 20% chance of arriving dead. I mean, things have changed radically, and we got to change things radically for our grandchildren too. So the president went out there today and, inspired by the oil spill, said, "Hey, we got to get alternative energy." And we've got to do it not because it's easy, but because it's hard. Now, he didn't exactly say that. There was a president 40 or 50 years ago, John F. Kennedy. But in this case, the president said words to that effect. We got to do this even though it's hard, a difficult challenge, and we can't quite see the way ahead and where we're going. And he said that if anybody tries to tell me we can't do this, I'll pop the guy in the nose. Now, of course, he said that in Obama speak, so it didn't quite come across like pop you in the nose. But so he made this big speech today, and you know me, TJ. I'm trying to save fucking Western civilization, for God's sakes, right?
Yes.
Uh, yes, and I'm not very determined or emotional about it. I just end up involuntarily ranting and roaring about it from time to time. So here's the deal. Um, the way ahead is very, very obvious. It's up there. It's up above our heads. It's all those asteroids worth $1 trillion and $17 trillion we've been talking about, and it's an infinite pool of energy. I mean, nothing is really infinite, but if you take infinity and divide it by 10, you still get infinity. And it's so much energy that it's more energy that we, at least in the foreseeable couple of centuries, could never possibly use, and it's going to change the nature of what it means to be human utterly, vastly, and astonishingly, and it's going to change the very nature of what it means to be a life form. So, Jason Louv and I have been working on visuals that get across why we got to look up, why we got to go for, why we got to harvest solar power in space so that we can begin to harvest whole new lives in space for ourselves and for ecosystems all over the place. So I knew the president was going to be making the speech 2 days ago, and we put together a fast visual, and we whipped it out to my press lists. And I mean, my press list is modest. I'm a scientist in seclusion, pounding away at ideas like theoretical physics. So I don't have much to do with the press anymore. But still, I've got a tiny little press list. So we got it out to the tiny little press list, anticipating the speech. And then, when I was able to get away from theoretical physics and emergent properties and a guy named Michael Polanyi and a bunch of stuff like that, which I'm doing for my next book to solve the problem of how the cosmos creates, tonight Jason and I dove back into it, and Jason produced another visual that gets the message across, and I pulled a bunch of lines from the president's speech, and I got them out to the public. Now, of course, I'm taking a slight chance here because one of my partners in this has been Buzz Aldrin, and Buzz and I both like to do something. You know, all the stuff that's running right now in the press about how multitasking destroys your brain,
Mm-hmm.
about how the fact that a kid 10 years ago was already capable of having, in fact, my stepson was capable of having an earbud in his ear, having a conversation with his best friend that lasted 7 hours from the time he got home from school until the time he went to bed at night. He was playing Halo simultaneously. He was playing Halo against teams of kids from 3 different continents, and he never even bothered to ask which continents they were on. And at the same time, he was doing his homework on the laptop I'd given him.
Mm-hmm.
And he seemed, I mean, sometimes he wrote some really brilliant stuff. Well, the current word of mouth is that the current word of mouth, the current propaganda we're getting from my friends in the scientific community, my colleagues in the scientific community, is every study shows that this is dumbing down the brain. That is crazy.
Yeah, I've had similar issues with that sort of thinking, and I've noticed that it's kind of ironic that this information seems to be getting propagated through the very means that they say are depriving us of information. And
You mean it's being Twittered, Facebooked,
yeah,
and
exactly.
Reddited?
That's how. Well,
I didn't.
the first time I heard about it was a retweet that Roger Ebert had done on Twitter about it, and I was reading about this idea that, oh yeah, we're just getting dumber and dumber because our attention spans are like these little insignificant things now, and
Okay, now listen up, TJ. I
I'm
probably
I'm noticing
I,
I'm reading this giant long article about how my attention span should be diminutive. So
right, and yes, and it's taking a long attention span to read it. Okay, now here's the deal. I probably told you this story before, so stop me if I've told it to you. But once upon a time, to get an education, you had to read the two basic books that underlay the entirety of civilization and told you all the values in life. But you didn't have to read them, you had to memorize them. You had to memorize every single goddamn word. And parents thought, oh, this is a wonderful exercise. My kid's going to spend 4 years memorizing every single goddamn word of these two civilizational books that are filled with rape and murder. Absolutely riddled with rape and murder. Mass killing to the nth degree. And then somebody decided, oh, you know, those Phoenicians over there, they've come up with this way of doing 24 little squiggles, and the 24 little squiggles represent sounds, and if you put the sounds together, they represent words, and you can actually take an entire book, which at that point was a recitation. You know, the guy who originally did it set himself up in somebody's court, and if they paid him off with a dinner, he recited episode 1, and then he left it with a cliffhanger. So they had to feed him another dinner to get episode 2. And by the time he was finished, he had 48 episodes or something like that. He managed to stay there for a year. And then, of course, he started on volume 2. Well, the guy who did this, people memorized what the original out loud poet, who didn't bother to write things down, had muttered in order to win dinner for 2 years, in a court, no less, with, influential people. So somebody came up with the idea of using this Phoenician things, squiggles, and using this invention from Egypt, mashed papyrus, mashed into a flat sheet, and writing the squiggles down on the mashed flat sheet, and putting the mashed flat sheets together so you had a whole roll of it. That could go on forever. And they committed one of the greatest technological crimes against human intelligence the planet has ever seen, TJ. And everybody knew it, especially parents. They put those two books down on those sheets of papyrus. And guess what that meant? Thanks to this newfangled technological innovation, kids were going to come out dumb. Do you know why they were going to come out stupid?
Because they no longer had to memorize those two books.
That's right. And it was the entire exercise of memorizing those two books. The Greeks were absolutely certain that was training and disciplining their kids' brains, like training for the Olympics. Now, with nothing to train for, with nothing to memorize, they were going to become idiots. And of course, those rolls of papyrus are what we know today as books, and the two books that all the kids were memorizing were the Iliad and the Odyssey, two of the bloodiest books in the world, along with two other foundational volumes. My arithmetic's not very good. And the two other foundational volumes were the Old Testament, My People's Book, and the Vedas, and they're all about bloody invasions of other people's territory and slaughtering every last person you find, but keeping a few alive to use as slaves or sex kittens. I mean, the Jews, God told them to be totally genocidal and kill everybody, every man, woman, child, goat, sheep, frog. But in the Vedas, the invading Indo-European peoples were told to kill the local devils. They're all portrayed as devils. They're brown people. They're called Dravidians. They're the people who live there, for God's sakes. And enslave them and put them into lower classes, which we call castes, and make them the Shudras, and basically the feet and ankles of society, while you, the Indo-Europeans, who had taken over the place and perpetrated this incredible myth about how it's very good in life to be a very obedient slave, and a very obedient farmer and be trod on all the time, because if you do it really, really well, you'll end up as an Aryan in the next generation, one of the super people, one of the master race. Ain't that great? So all you have to do is be patient in this lifetime. So what does it have to do with technology and multitasking and what I was doing today with space solar power? Good question, TJ. Thank you for that. You're welcome. And it has to do with this, because people thought books would make their kids dumb. But guess what happened once you could get these things into books? Instead of only having 2 books in your life, you could have 20 books in your life. You might even be able to get 200 books in your life. And if you are really lucky and manage to hang out at the ultimate library, the library in Alexandria, Egypt, you might even have 2,000 books in your life. And you could become a scholar. Now, as you and I both know, TJ, the parents who were frightened to death of books in roughly 500 BC were absolutely right. Because those scholars sitting there at the library in Alexandria with access to 2,000 books, obviously dummies. How do you know? Ask them to recite you one entire book and they can't do it. They're idiots!
Oh.
Idiots! And the same thing is going to happen to us, TJ. That same miserable fate. So you measure people by the standards of one generation, and of course the next generation turn out to be dolts. It just happens to be that they can think 20 times faster than the adults who were making these dire predictions.
Yeah, I guess that I guess it really just amounts to everyone being afraid of their way of life and their way of thinking coming to an end.
That's it. You got it. And there's another little factor here, and it goes back to social psychology and the work of, oh God, what is his name? The guy who wrote the book on influence that's become the leading social psychology book. And I knew him when he had just issued this book, and no one knew if it was going to succeed or not. But at any rate, whatever his name is, Robert Cialdini. There's a classic social psychology exercise. Now imagine you're now a teacher in in a grad school of psychology, and you have to teach in the undergraduate school. And when you're looking for experimental subjects, who do you look for? Students, and you're male, so what kind of students do you look for? Girls, TJ. What happens if you're a professor and you are a fascinating, spellbinding lecturer, and girls are looking up to you with goggly eyes and hopefully creaming in their seats? This is why professors tend to have a wife for 2 years and then trade her in for a new wife.
The life
because
of an academic, yeah.
Yes, the life of an academic. So at any rate, yes, all of that objectivity that makes for intellectual purity. Oh well, at any rate, so much for intellectual purity. So you've got classes of 100 girls taking your elementary psychology class, and of course they have to earn an extra psychology credit, and the only way they can do it is by participating in one of your experiments. Now, of course, they have a choice of 2 experiments, the ones you conduct in your own bedroom or your office, and the ones that you actually conduct when other people are around. But we won't go into that. I never mentioned that, TJ. No, not at all. This is family-rated YouTube. So they divide the group up into 100 girls is one group, and another 100 girls is another group, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you've created, you being the diabolically intelligent group psychologist, have created a girls' club. And you have written a manifesto for the girls' club. And you have given the girls' club a name. And you have deliberately given the girls' club a name that makes it sound boring, as boring as dust mites, dead dust mites. And you've created a manifesto that says essentially nothing. There is nothing to this club. That's the way you've designed it. Now, Group A, 100 girls, have to just simply see a little description of the club and sign a sheet if they want to belong. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So they sign the sheet, and then they go to their first meeting of the club, and there's nothing happening. So guess what they do? They drop out. They all drop out. Okay, now the other group, Group B, You have designed, TJ, you are diabolical. I don't know how you get away with this stuff, aside from lusting after all these girls and actually getting some of them dead, or in other more compromising positions that don't even involve taking off all your clothes. But remember the presidential knee pads that were spoken of in the days of Bill Clinton? At any rate, what was her name again? The girl who was caused all that trouble. At any rate, where is she today? So, Group B, you have devised a fiendish, absolutely fiendish set of rituals these girls will have to go through before they can enter your club. You have carefully studied the history of every abusive fraternity and sorority in sight, and you have taken on every single one of their most impossible and hideous rituals. And you've put these girls through 6 months of hell to get into this club. So they show up for their first meeting. Hey, it's the same empty club. It's the same empty name. It's the same meaningless manifesto. It's still sitting around with absolutely nothing to do. And guess what these girls, now remember what the first girls, the girls in Group A did. They dropped out, right?
Yeah.
What do you think happens to the girls who have been put through hell?
I don't think they dropped out.
No, they stick with that club through hell and high water, even if it is totally pointless.
They probably
Because
get mad if someone disparages its name.
yes, and I'm sure they would, TJ. And now Cialdini, that's as far as Cialdini goes in expressing and interpreting this. But there's an interpretation beyond it. If you've gone through a really hellish experience, and there are another 100 people who have also gone through that hellish experience, and you can talk about it with those people, it is a bonding experience. So you are not getting nothing from the club, even though the designers designed it to give you absolutely nothing. You are getting the companionship of 100 other girls who are gone through the same damn shit. And that means everything in the world to you. Now, given the fact that human contact has enormous value, here's the kind of enormous value human contact has. A person who doesn't feel he's got human contact and isn't needed or isn't held tight by other people in some way, isn't adored by them, isn't valued by them, his immune system begins to plunge. He becomes open to disease. His perceptual system goes into underdrive. He can't figure out an answer to any problem around him. He can't even figure it out when the solution is put right in front of his nose. But if a person has lots of social contact and lots of connections with people who seem to need her, then the immune system goes into overdrive. That person is healthy as a horse, and her perceptual system begins to operate on overdrive. So here, these group psychologists had designed a club that was deliberately meant to offer nothing and to be empty. But guess what it ended up offering, despite what the psychologists had designed it for? Group bonding, cohesion, friends, people that you love because you've been in the trenches with them together. And what does that do to your immune system and your cognitive system? Gets them racing. Now, but the real point of this is that if you've gone through hell, think of the hell that the parents must have gone through in 600 BC to memorize those 2 damn books. It must have been miserable. So would they want their kids not to be a part of their group and not to have to go through this thing that they clung to for the rest of their lives because they put so much time and misery into achieving it?
Yeah.
No, the kids had better damn well go through the same misery too.
Yeah, that's
So you're right. That's essentially what you said a few minutes ago. I've just put it in slightly more verbose terms.
yeah, that was I never really thought about the purpose of those strenuous rituals and those initiation rites and all that. I was actually watching a video on YouTube the other day where there was some tribe, I think, in I don't remember where the fuck they lived, but
Tribes, they always make such
I
good
know
video.
this was
Okay, go ahead.
this was great because there's this they they have this ant called the bullet ant, which is supposedly has the most painful sting of any insect, the highest rank on the pain indexes, however pain is measured, and
Right?
they take these ants and they basically have these oven mitt like gloves where they put the ants stinger first into the gloves and then I think they dunk them in liquid to get them especially pissed off, and then
Yeah.
the males of the tribe have to stick their hands in the gloves and like let the
Oh,
ants
great.
sting them all over their hands for like I think something like 10 minutes. And
Yes, sounds like a classical male initiation ritual.
yeah, but they
Um,
have to do this 20 times to get.
oh my God.
Yeah, I mean I can understand the idea of needing to do that once to prove how manly you are, but 20 times, I mean.
Well, certainly, I'm sure it glues you to the tribe, makes you unwilling to depart with your brothers. If you go up against a rival tribe, there's no way in hell you're going to abandon those who've been through the same damn ritual that you have. And then, of course, unrelated to this subject is the fact that the Aztec priests were absolutely convinced. I mean, look, God was the sun. And God got up in the morning and you could see him rising in the east and everything was glorious and fine. But then when God went to bed at night, the sky was filled with red. Now, do you know why the sky was filled with red as far as the Aztecs were concerned?
Uh, the gods wanted blood.
Because the god was being skinned alive
Oh Jesus.
and was going down flayed, skinned alive, nothing but red, oozing, bloody flesh at night, nothing but a piece of naked meat still alive with the pain, all of the pain. So, because their god was so involved with blood, I mean, this happened once a day, poor fellow, the Aztecs felt that they had to sacrifice blood. So, do you know what the Aztecs did to sacrifice blood? And it's the kings who had to do this, poor babies.
um, no, I don't.
Well, there's some sort of a stinger, probably on a stingray or something of the sort. So its bone is it has all kinds of barbs on it, but it's sharp as hell.
Mm.
And they had to put it through their penis, TJ.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Yes, I don't think it's a great idea either, and God knows what it did to bond them to their people or bond them to their God, because this kind of thing is some sort of bonding thing. But they did it, and if we can ever figure out why and what it accomplished for their society, well, it'll be interesting. Um, So there I was, speaking of the sun, trying to get across the message that if the president is looking for something that is a huge challenge, something about which he can say, I don't care how impossible you say it is, we're going to do it anyway, because that's what he said in his speech he was going for. And if he wants something that will change the American destiny, because that's something else he mentioned in his speech today, space, 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 and more space. The fact is, and I put this into the press release that I was writing at about 10:30 tonight, um, that the Germans and the Chinese have already got the locks on all of the traditional alternative energy technologies. That is, ground-based solar, geothermal, and wind. They've got it. They're already masters of these things. They got in before we did. We got in before they did. We got in the 1970s under Jimmy Carter, and then a president who is these days being turned into a saint by the folks on the right. I have many fans on the right, but by the folks on the right, Ronald Reagan dismantled all the wind and solar programs and put us 20 to 30 years behind.
I,
But the fact is, we are 20 to 30 years behind now. But we are ahead in one technology, and that's access to space, access to these to resources that make the resources of this planet look like what they are in the grand scheme of things, tiny. The resources up there are tremendous, and life needs those resources. But we've said this in previous interviews. And so that's what I was working on tonight. And I was sending out that picture that Jason Louv did, which was brilliant, to my press list. And that's it. I mean, same old tonight, unfortunately. Just trying to save Western civilization. For God's sakes.
well,
Nothing interesting.
it needs saving, so
Yes,
it's
nothing
always
major.
it's in need of perpetual salvation, though, isn't it?
Yes, well, that's quite true. We all are. We get up in the morning, and if we don't have enough human contact or interesting things to do, I have this friend. I don't know if I should reveal his identity. His name is, he goes under the name of Jackson Q. Public. Jackson Q. Public is the creator of a TV series that he's just finished the fourth season of. It's called The Venture Brothers.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah, I like that show.
yeah, and my friend Jackson Q. Public used to come over to the house a long time ago, maybe 10 years ago, as he was a big fan of Lucifer Principle. And he would come over here, and he was he was concerned. He was in his mid-20s. He'd had his first network television show, he and his best friend, when they were 23 years old. It was utterly fabulous. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It was The Tick, and it was on the Fox TV network. It
Yeah,
was incredible.
I know quite a few. That's definitely something that appeals to my circle of friends and
Well,
confidants. So
I adored it. So at any rate, so young Jackson used to come over to the house all the time, pissing and moaning, because he wanted to have his own TV series, not a TV series with his best friend Ben Edlund. He had done that, a TV series of his own. And he was working with a partner, and he wasn't at all sure about the partner, and he wasn't comfortable with the partner, but he couldn't seem to come up with his own idea, and then an idea began to dawn on him. For one thing, there were rumors that the reason that I was no longer in the record industry and was stuck in bed for 15 years was that I either had AIDS, or I was on heroin, or the third alternative, I had taken so much speed that I had ultimately doped myself out of the human race and was a burnt-out Hulk and a shell. That was one rumor. Of course, I didn't even drink coffee, but that was irrelevant. Much less do any drugs, not even recreational, but that's irrelevant. So the rumor was around, and Chris came up with this idea of, we've got this scientist, see, and he's done so much speed that he's burnt out his frigging brain, and he's got these two kids, right? And so, and he once upon a time was a hero, and he goes up against villain superheroes, but in reality, whenever danger lurks, he tosses his kids into the jaws of the crocodile to keep them occupied chewing up his sons so he can get away. Now, that was the origin of Doc Venture. So guess who Doc Venture is very, very loosely based on? I bet you can't think of a single candidate.
that's
No burned-out scientist who sounds like he's on speed all the time, even though he doesn't do drugs at all, right? So, man, we won't get personal here, but the point is that here's Chris, and my friend Jackson Q. Public, and he is a terrific, absolutely wonderful human being, and intelligent as all hell. And he used to swear the following to me. He would say, I need to make sure that when I take a weekend, in those days he had weekends before he sold his first season of the Venture Brothers. Since then, he's had no weekends whatsoever. But in those days, he used to have weekends. And he swore that a weekend was supposed to be a time in which you did things spontaneously. Well, I got to watch him weekend after weekend after weekend. And he refused to plan anything for the weekend because he was going to wake up on Saturday morning and do things with chipper and energetic, spontaneous enthusiasm, right? Make sense?
No, not really, but all right.
Okay, so every Saturday morning, the same thing happened. With no goals, he woke up in an utter fog. His perceptual system had gone to Alaska for the summer. His motivational system had gone to Russia to carouse with the girls. He wasn't there. He was in a gray fog. He spent 48 hours in a gray fog. 48 hours, otherwise known as Saturday and Sunday, the weekend, because he had no goals in mind. And I kept trying to convince him, Chris, while your brain is still running, that means on Friday night, come up with a goal for Saturday, so that when you wake up in the morning, you will have a goal. And if you have a goal when you wake up in the morning on Saturday, you won't feel utterly disconnected from your fellow human beings, and you will not go into the land of gray fog and disappear from the planet for 48 hours of misery, thinking that your real misery was going to come Monday morning, when in fact it was your salvation that was going to come Monday morning, because somebody else would give you a purpose in life. It's called a job, right? It was hard to get this message across, but when it comes to saving civilizations, it's the same damn message. Without a goal to aim for, you go flabby. You go comatose. You go idiotic. And idiotic includes having all kinds of fancy intellectual schemes in which you blame yourself for every woe of mankind, not realizing how many woes you have dragged mankind away from permanently, permanently, through your efforts during the days of the week when somebody else gave you something to do. So at any rate, it all has to do with purpose and how girls got an artificial purpose by being given a really, 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 really hard thing to do, and then discovering that they bonded around it. There's a guy named William H. McNeill, who is a terrific, absolutely wonderful, fabulous historian, did a book called Dance and Drill in History and Time, or something like that. And it talks about muscular bonding and how when we march together, it bonds us together. When we dance together, it bonds us together. When we do difficult things together, it bonds us together. And I stole a phrase from an academic someplace out in Stony Brook who seemed to have thrown the phrase away, functional bonding, and that we do something together and it bonds us together. And the harder it is to do it, the greater the bond. So my Uncle Sam was around for World War II. And my Uncle Sam was in the trenches with a guy who was worth 1,000 times what my Uncle Sam was worth in terms of money. He came from a really, really rich family, and from a guy from Brooklyn. My Uncle Sam lived up in Niagara Falls, New York. Well, that was in the 1940s, for God's sakes. When my Uncle Sam died at the age of 87, the best friends with whom that remained his best friends to that day, the people he went out of his way to spend time with, even in his 80s, were the really rich guy who had been in the trenches with him and the guy from Brooklyn who had been in the trenches with him, because being through a really difficult, trying experience bonds you in incredible ways. And we tend to be somewhat lacking in our bonds as a civilization these days because we don't see anything ahead of ourselves that's difficult that we need to achieve. And we went through this problem in 1960 when John F. Kennedy was elected president. And for the first 22 months, I think it was, of his presidency, the guy floundered and he didn't have a vision. And then he got disturbed by the Russian space program and the fact that the Russians were sending a man into space. And we hadn't done anything of the sort yet. And he made a speech, and he gave us a real simple, easy to visualize goal. We are going to the moon, he said. And back to the lessons of all of these initiation rituals that these girls go through and then stick with their group forever. He said, we are not going there because it is easy. We are going there because it is hard.
I want to kind of I have when you were talking about China and civilization, you kind of reminded me of this documentary that I saw recently called "Please Vote for Me." I don't know if you've seen that or not.
Oh, what is it?
It's a documentary wherein these Chinese students in like a third grade classroom are for the first time, they're going to be able to vote for the class monitor, who is like the kid that goes around and tells everyone what to do and basically assists the teacher.
Right.
And it's always been an appointed position, and for the first time, as part of this documentary and really social experiment, these kids are going to be allowed to vote for one of three candidates from among their class. And
Right.
it's just really great to see, because up until I'd seen this documentary, I'd always believed that our system had developed into what it is today. But now I see that, like, really the second you introduce the concept of voting, everything that accompanies that just immediately comes out of the woodwork, because
Very interesting.
these
What did you see coming out of the woodwork?
these kids were running dirty campaigns.
Oh my God.
They were figuring out tactics about how to make their opponents look bad. They were paying they were basically bribing other students to interrupt speeches, and just engaging in all of these tactics that you wouldn't, I guess. I mean, even
Well,
I was even I
there's a
wasn't.
long history of that unique to China, because that was exactly the kind of techniques that the kids in the Chinese Cultural Revolution were pulling on each other. Look at Mao. Mao was getting old in the 1960s, He wasn't the same youthful, vigorous leader he had been, and a bunch of bureaucrats were beginning to take over the government, and they were even talking about possibly shelving Mao, putting him in some glorious, wonderful leader position that meant nothing, and actually running the country themselves. And Mao was not the kind of man to take being retired involuntarily lightly, to say the least. So he turned to the teenagers of the country, and he inspired them with his little red book to vast feats of idealism. And he called on them to take over the damn society and knock the people who were threatening him out of power totally. But to do it in the name of idealism, to do it in the name of the Maoist philosophy, which was going to take all of humanity to a higher plane. And that's where Vision comes in. He really was talking about taking humanity to a higher plane. Unfortunately, it was sneaky and monstrous and nasty, and there turned out to be no higher human plane but a market capitalism at the end of the rainbow. But he got these kids fighting with each other, killing each other, undermining each other, snapping at each other's speeches, trying to totally destroy each other's credibility. It was a nightmare, the Chinese Cultural Revolution, and it was all teenagers working against each other in politics and war, because these groups of young Mao Zedong followers, idealistic Mao Zedong followers, would literally kill each other and torture each other in order to accomplish their idealistic mission of bringing Mao's values and ideals to life. So it's not as if this is the first time this has happened in China. This is a well-tried way of dealing with democracy, and my guess is that de Tocqueville was right. Now, you know de Tocqueville's work?
No, I don't.
Well, it was okay. I'm going to tell this story very poorly because I've never had a chance to study de Tocqueville to the extent that I would have liked. But around 1827, which was a very fruitful time in intellectual circles, it's when Hegel was doing his work in Germany. It's when Carlyle, the social critic, was doing his work in England. And de Tocqueville was a kid who grew up in the wake of the French Revolution and all of its promise and all of its nightmares, all of the beheadings, all of the blood in the streets, all of the very same kinds of underminings that you're talking about seeing in this Chinese classroom, but done with guillotines, with real weapons. And Carlyle decided to take a tour of the de Tocqueville decided to take a tour of the United States. And he wrote a stunning book, TJ, about what he saw in the United States, because the United States was the only functioning democracy. There weren't any others. France had tried and failed to accomplish a democracy. So we wanted to see what impact the democracy had on a society. And what he discovered was the American gift was not a gift for undermining each other. It was not a gift for sabotaging each other. It was not a gift for dirty tricks. It was a gift for the opposite. It was a gift for civic virtues. It was a gift for knowing how to get along with each other to try to make things happen. It was a gift for putting local groups together, Elks Clubs, or the equivalent of Elks Clubs, all over the place, Masonic groups, all kinds of private groups in which individuals tried to get together and accomplish remarkable things, often charitable things. And he was stunned. He had never seen anything like that in any other country in the world. So de Tocqueville felt that the major characteristic of American culture was our ability to cooperate with each other to make things happen, even informally. And we know that things of the kind you're describing have taken place in American politics, but hopefully they're not entirely the norm. I mean, I think politics is a little dirtier now than it used to be because it's so polarized right now, and the middle ground has been, at this particular moment in time, has been totally stripped of its validity for some reason. And look, I try to hover above the cliches of left and right. I try not to be a part of the cliches of left and right. But because I give equal regard to each of them and try to pay attention to what they have of value to say and try to avoid what they have that's decrepit and terrible and nasty, if I'm hovering anywhere, I'm hovering somewhere slightly to the left of the middle. And the middle, which is a position I identify with, is being utterly gutted right now. But back when I was 8 years old and was the most unpopular kid on the planet, no other kid wanted to have anything to do with me. For some reason, it might have been that my family, my father had moved us from a little tiny house about the size of a shoebox to a much bigger house in a much better neighborhood. The kid who had been in charge of the gang, who had beat me up religiously every day of the week for 3 years running from the time I was 5, no, it would have been 4 years running, from the time I was 4 years old, suddenly decided to do something radically different with me. I got into stamp collecting because it was something one kid could do on his own. I didn't have to have, be accepted by a team because no team would have me anywhere, ever. Um, so there I was stamp collecting, and he would come over to my house and saw that I was stamp collecting. So he got me into the Jewish center in town, since I'm a Jewish atheist, and he got me into the stamp club. And guess what he did once he got me into the stamp club? Me, the most unpopular kid on the block. Me, the kid who was used as a football. Um, not in a game of football. He decided to run me for president of the damn thing. Well, it turned out, and remember, we're 8 years old, TJ. 8 bloody years old. And he decides to run me for president, and it turns out that there's the Hartwell gang that he runs from the street I used to live on, and then there's this other group called the Parkside gang, which is a group from a whole different neighborhood, much more affluent neighborhood. And when it comes right down to it, the guy who's running me for president, his version of politics is to go over to the head of the group, the Parkside gang, the rival group, and give him a bloody nose. So, to a certain extent, dirty tricks, I guess, are a part of any political process. But in the United States, we have a much higher emphasis on civic virtues. Now, about 6 years ago, maybe it was 7, I went to Thanksgiving with somebody whose cousin was married to a guy who teaches economics at West Point. So there I was having Thanksgiving dinner on the West Point campus. And I had never met anybody from the military before in my life. Little Jewish kids don't have military aunts, uncles, and cousins. Whereas if you grow up in the South, you do have military aunts, uncles, and cousins. So this is my first exposure to a military guy. And the guy having dinner with us was Casey somebody or other. He had a nice Polish name, who was a lieutenant colonel in the Army. And he had been given the job of handling retention for the Army. Recruitment and retention. How do you bring guys into the Army, and how do you keep them there once you've got them there? So you know what this guy did?
What?
To go after retention, you'd think he did something statistical and dry and stupid, right? He created a video game called America's Army. And it became one of the 3 most popular video games in God knows what sort of a listing. I have no clue. But the point is, talking to this guy for 4 hours during a Thanksgiving dinner, I realized this was a guy who had more of a sense of civic virtue than anyone I had ever met in my life. What's civic virtue? Civic virtue is valuing the value of a dialogue, valuing dialogue with those who you would regard as your enemies, valuing being fair in that dialogue, valuing being honest in that dialogue, valuing being honest in elections, valuing the things that make a democracy tick and that make it a pleasure to live in a society. And I had never heard these values articulated with such vigor and such simplicity as this guy was articulating. Now, who would you really expect to hear the civic virtues that make for a peaceful society from? A military guy or somebody in politics?
I wouldn't expect to hear it from anybody, but...
Well, and I wouldn't expect to hear it especially from a military guy, because remember, back in the 1960s, when we were all marching against the war in Vietnam, we were listening to an Arlo Guthrie song, and one of the dominant things called Alice's Restaurant, which was about how the military recruits and why we should all be against the war. And once you got into the military, Arlo Guthrie told us, the motto that you heard over and over again was, kill, 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 kill. I don't know if you remember that line from the song. But at any rate, it appeared over and over again. So the last thing you expected to hear from a military guy was how we all can get along together by paying attention to each other and respecting each other's point of view, even when we disagree with each other's point of view. But hey, not only was it in Casey, whatever his name is, his mouth during 4 hours of dinner conversation, it was in his game. America's Army was a game not based on killing and slaughter like Halo and all the other games that my kid was playing, or like Grand Theft Auto, which came along after my kid got into Halo. It was about how to get along with each other and how to enrich each other with our ideas, even when we disagree. And it came out of the Army, and it was a video game, and you didn't shoot people.
I'm just surprised it was popular, given that. I don't know what the angle is
But
there.
but that's what Alexis de Tocqueville told us this country was all about as long ago as 1827. I mean, it's bad enough that we had that for the last 30 years I've been crusading to get out of the cliches of left and right. But at this point, I'll take the cliches of the middle over the cliches of the left and right anytime. I'd rather that we be off the number line somewhere, hovering in a different space than cliche. But the cliches of the middle look good to me at this point.
Well, if I mean, what do you attribute that polarization to?
People need somebody to hate. And it's a basic part of human nature. And if you can point to another group and say they're the ones responsible for all of this, it not only does it build you up with the group beneath you, it especially builds you up in a time of troubles. And this is a time of troubles. When you can point to somebody and say it's their fault, that's why we had this crash. It's Wall Street, it's bankers, it's Jews, it's right-wingers, it's left-wingers. Then life becomes very simple. And we all welcome an easy explanation, because hard explanations are hard. And hard explanations are what we're up against right now. But in The Genius of the Beast, A Radical Re-Vision of Capitalism, my brand new book, which everybody should run out and buy immediately so that I have enough money to feed to, let's say, I don't have any cats or dogs anymore, but to leave enough crumbs on the floor for the mice. So please go out and buy that book. But it says that in reality, bankers are not the cause of economic crashes. Speculators are not the cause of economic crashes. Con artists like Bernie Madoff are not the cause of crashes. Bacterial colonies go through crashes and booms too. Lynx in the Arctic go through crashes and booms. So do the rabbits that the lynx live off of. They go through crashes and booms. You can find crash and boom as an essential pattern riddled throughout the history of life. That's nearly 4 billion years of history, and riddled throughout the history of humanity and fuzzy animals all over the place. And it's because we are part of a search strategy. We're part of a larger search engine. It's a search engine that's continually uncovering new things, and that search engine works on something that in science is called the fission-fusion strategy. And in the fission-fusion strategy, at a certain point, you spread out and explore, and you have tremendous exuberance, and you have extraordinarily high hopes for the most peculiar of things. And then you go through a period of crash. And in a period of crash, you are afraid of just about everything. And you reevaluate everything that you've just tested during your period of exploration. And you throw out the things that don't work. And more than that, you build safety nets for the things that turned out to produce dangers. And then you get exuberant again and you go back and explore. And there's a 62.5-year cycle of crash and boom that we go through that brings the really big crashes. And guess what? It's just about 62.5 years after the Great Depression of 1929 to 1939. In fact, it's exactly, I don't know, TJ, I can't do the arithmetic, 61 years after that ended. And meanwhile, we go through little mini crash and boomlets they're in 3-year cycles, 3 years up, 3 years down, 3 years up, 3 years down. We've been calling those recessions until we plastered the name recession on this depression so we didn't scare people with the idea that they were in a depression. Sorry, it's a depression! I don't know if anybody heard that, but...
well, I did want to ask you about that because I was reading that book and I was actually kind of wondering, you were talking about fusion periods as periods of consolidation, and I was wondering what you think the consolidations of this particular crash or recession, depression, whatever you want to call it. What exactly have we consolidated this time around? Because I'm having trouble coming up with something.
Well, it's a tricky one, TJ, because we've taken a principle that back in the Great Crash of 1907, there was a panic of 1907. In those days, they called them panics, and then they started to call them depressions because panic sounded so scary, and then depression became scary, so we call them recessions again, and pretty soon recession's going to sound scary, so we'll go back to panic or something like that. But at any rate, in 1907, there was a
Just call
big
it Fluffy
crash.
Happy Time or something.
Yes, Fluffy Happy Time. What a great idea! I think that's true. I'll vote for that one.
You should make a little petition for viewer questions.
Yes. Viewers, send in your questions. Challenge us with interesting stuff. Your questions are some of those fun things that we go up against. You have interesting ideas. Flood us with them. Because TJ has to go through them. If it was just me, I'd say only send in 5. But no, TJ will be going through them.